Before we get to know our panelists here, I just wanted to get to know who's in our audience. If you can, by a show of hand, who's here from a law firm? Nice. Corporation? Very good. Wow, more than I expected. That's great. NGOs? A lot. Nice. And any law students or future lawyers not in this room? Or a couple. Okay, very good. We all know that pro bono, for the most part, is a key element in law firm culture, and more so now in recent years in the corporate world, which is great. But there's still a lot more work that needs to be done, and that's why we're here. PillNet has been working to increase corporate involvement over recent years, and especially yesterday, we hosted our first in-house counsel roundtable discussion. And we created a space for lawyers to openly speak and share their experiences and best practices in making pro bono part of their own culture. We're looking to build on those discussions today and to support the corporate pro bono movement. In the collaborative spirit of the forum, we have representatives from both law firms and corporations here with us, and I'll let them each introduce themselves and give a brief overview of their programs. We have Claire Carlis from Siemens.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I didn't have as long a journey to get here as many of you had, although getting into London from even an hour outside can sometimes be as big a challenge as flying in from Europe. So this morning actually was a good journey, so that's good. My current role is as the General Counsel for Siemens in the UK. I have a large team in the UK, around 95 people, made up of both lawyers and non-qualified contract management staff and support staff, and the team is based all across the UK. I have a background in private practice and in-house work. I've worked in the UK and overseas, so seen different aspects of the law from different sides, I suppose. My interest in pro bono started in the mid-1980s, before I qualified, actually, when I started volunteering at the Fulham Legal Advice Centre. Fulham is in southwest London. And to my shame, I'm not really sure if the Fulham Legal Advice Centre is there anymore, something I will go and check after this session. Then, having had a gap of a number of years when I worked overseas, I joined Vodafone and was involved in setting up, I think, one of the first in-house pro bono programs when Vodafone joined LawWorks, an organization that you heard a little bit about earlier on this morning. So then moving to Siemens, we've set up a similar program there. I'm also a trustee of LawWorks and also a volunteer. So I am currently working on and have worked on a number of pro bono projects advising charities, particularly on their corporate status. So that's me. I think I'm a firm believer that there is a lot more scope for in-house teams to be more involved in pro bono activity. I think at the moment it's a little bit of an untapped resource. In the UK now, in-house lawyers make up about, I think, a third of the profession, and that is ever growing. So I think if we are, as a legal community, going to increase the support for pro bono, in-house teams are a good resource for us to look at. So that's me.
Thank you, Claire. Tom Dunn from Clifford Chance.
Good morning, everybody. I am the pro bono director at Clifford Chance. Like Claire, I've had a fairly varied career. I was a legal aid solicitor, mainly practicing in South London for about 10 years, where I specialised in housing law, acting for tenants who were in disputes with landlords and for homeless people seeking to challenge decisions by the state as to what duties they were owed as homeless people. I then worked in a law school for 3 years, running a public legal education project on a housing estate or housing project in Brixton in South London. And I've been in my role at Clifford Chance for about 7 years now. So, you know, I find these discussions that we were hearing earlier about the interaction between pro bono and legal aid and access to justice really, really interesting. Like Claire, I think there is, you know, a significant untapped resource in the shape of in-house counsel that we all have an interest in seeing contribute to that interaction domestically, never mind the potential for in-house lawyers to be involved in international projects. My role at Clifford Chance is really about managing and developing the firm's pro bono practice, both here in London but also around our network of offices around the world. In this role, I find myself using the word strategy far more than I ever thought I would, but we do like to think we have a coherent strategy for bringing in the right sort of pro bono projects where we can make a real contribution, a serious contribution that's going to make a difference and have an impact. We do that through a committee involving all partners from all of our offices whose responsibility is to drive the development of the practice in their offices, and also by having in place some very clear ideas about the most effective way in which we can work, and structures in place to manage all the key issues around risk and quality that we face as pro bono practitioners. And in a nutshell, where we're successful in collaborating with in-house counsel, on our side, I think it's because of our ability to extend that strategic approach, that infrastructure that we use to run our own practice around the contribution of in-house counsel.
Thank you, Tom. And we have Shinobu Garigas-Pula from Caterpillar.
Good morning. So currently, I'm the regulatory lawyer based in Brussels for Caterpillar, dealing with all types of regulatory issues from data privacy to product regulations for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. I was transferred there on an international assignment by Caterpillar. Prior to that, 4 years ago, I was in headquarters in Peoria, Illinois, where I started out doing IP work and did some international trade and other regulatory work. My background, perhaps, I actually went to law school initially thinking that I wanted to do international human rights law. And after a brief stint in the UN Human Rights Subcommission, I was rather disillusioned with the way things worked in the UN. And so I did a complete 180 and joined Hogan and was working on international project finance. But even at Hogan and then at Caterpillar, pro bono has been a very important part of my career and my profession. Hogan has, as you heard earlier, has had a very strong pro bono program. And that was one of the things when I went in-house that really attracted me to Caterpillar, was that they have a very strong, established pro bono program that is promoted and advocated by our general counsel. When I moved to Brussels 4 years ago, I realized that the system of pro bono, especially in-house, outside of the US, is perhaps not as established as elsewhere. And so one of my goals had been to formalize the Caterpillar in-house pro bono program for the legal staff in Europe. And that's what I've done over the last few years. It has been a bit of a struggle trying to identify appropriate projects where our staff feel comfortable and are able to, with some regulatory constraints on in-house counsel. But in collaboration with our next speaker, we were able to identify some good projects, and hopefully we can discuss some of that.
Great, thank you. And last but not least is Charles Albert Helford from Mayer Brown.
Hi, everyone. So I'm also based in Brussels. I'm a transactional lawyer, but deeply involved in pro bono work. I'm chairing the EU committee of Mayer Brown, and I'm also part of the global committee, for whatever that means. But the basic things about that is that what we try to do as a firm, probably as Thomas mentioned, is that we try to get organized and share best practice around the firm about pro bono work. It's probably fair to say that US and the UK were pioneers and have a very deep pro bono culture, whereas in continental Europe it was less the case. So when I joined the firm in 2007, with a background of being a private practitioner and having spent times doing asylum case, immigration case, and so on, I was willing to get involved in pro bono work. And what we quickly realized is that because of the type of work we were doing as a firm, it was more complicated to source pro bono project and to get all lawyers interested to do pro bono work. So what we did is to try to find new pro bono project that could be worth presenting to our people. And in fact, what you realize, so you use strategies, my strategies, or probably more down to earth, but it's strategies to have people get involved. So, and to some extent, it's interesting to see that we had the same kind of discussion when we first met with Shinobu or with other corporate clients, is that it's really that trend of trying to find those projects where both as continental Europe lawyers, but as in-house lawyers, we can do some things that will prove to be efficient and worth doing.
Great, thank you. Before we get to the regulatory issues and all the challenges that they face, we wanted to talk about how the pro bono projects are being sourced within the corporations and how the law firms are going about finding the right projects for their in-house counsel partners. If Shinobu, I can ask you to start on how it's done at Caterpillar and how you go about it.
As I said, the program in the U.S. is pretty well established, and it's very, very localized. So it is kind of a grassroots initiative, people trying to identify clients whose lives they can affect at a local level. But in addition to that, we work with some clearinghouses and in close collaboration with a lot of the major law firms with who we use to identify projects where we can have our employees from various offices work together with the law firm on a particular project. So those are what we call kind of our desk projects, and in many cases they have a global aspect to them. So it maybe touches on an issue that would affect communities globally, that would have a global impact, and for which we can solicit our volunteers from around the world in various offices around the world. That's probably I think using our law firm partners is one of the major ways that we get the.
Yeah. If Charles, you can speak a little bit more about.
Yeah, as I'm the one
well.
getting those work to Shinobu. No, so basically, as I just said, so we, to some extent, trying to work in partnership with corporate clients, for me, is not as different as my day-to-day job of trying to have more lawyers of my own doing pro bono work, because simply the type of project we are looking at or looking for are probably very identical or about the same. So taking the example of the Brussels office, we are an EU office doing a lot of things like regulatory competition, etc. So if you step out to those people saying, look, I have a very interesting case, you need to go and seek asylum for an Iraqi who is just over there and who needs your help, they will all say, no way, that's not something I'm comfortable doing, I just can't do it. And although we have some exception to those type of things, it's very often something that or the same feeling you will get from your in-house people saying, okay, that's not what I want to do. I want to use my skills to do good project. And so how we can find them? So there are, of course, many ways. So you can say clearinghouse will be the way to go. Unfortunately, for continental Europe, what we see is that very often the type of project you are getting are not always suitable or appropriate, so to speak, because either they are very outside of comfort zone or they are very UK driven, or so there are many reasons just to or needing you to go outside that only circle of clearinghouse. So what we try to do is to partner with NGOs, so have direct contacts with NGOs, identify those NGOs where we think we can have good feeling about for our lawyers and our people. And with those direct contacts with NGOs, try to identify the project that could be suitable for all lawyers, but also for in-house teams of our clients. So that's typically the way we will be doing it.
And I might just add, so that those long-term relationships with a vetted NGO is really important for Caterpillar, because we do have even within our pro bono program, a rather strict vetting process to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest with a potential pro bono client. We have to make sure that there are no denied parties, or there are no issues with anti-corruption, and so on, before we can take on a pro bono client. So having that established already with the first vetting by the law firm is also important. And I would also want to say that the clearinghouses come up with some really very interesting projects that I find we potentially would have interest, but being such a large and spread out organization at Caterpillar, it's very difficult to respond in a timely manner to those project requests. So we find that we simply can't meet the deadline to say yes, we're willing to work on a project, because we don't want to say I don't want to say as a coordinator, yes, we will work on that project, and then I find out that there's actually nobody who has the time or the inclination at that point.
So you're finding that the response time is too short.
Exactly.
For the corporations.
Yeah.
Interesting. And Claire, do you have, I know you go through LawWorks a lot to find
Yes,
your
mostly.
pro bono
So
projects.
when I worked at Vodafone, we were involved with LawWorks, but also did do some projects jointly with our law firms, and that was very effective. At Siemens, we now work mainly with LawWorks, and we find that to be very effective. There is a preference for, I think, people to work in the domestic market at the moment. We may expand people's horizons in the future, but we're just starting really. Pro bono is fairly new to Siemens over the last couple of years. So what LawWorks gives us is very easy access to small community groups, small charities, some individuals who have a need. One of the things we identified when I first set up the program at Vodafone is that it's very difficult for an in-house team actually to find people who need help. How do we know who needs help? And LawWorks is able to provide that service for us. So LawWorks will receive a request for support from a small community group or charity. They will then try to understand what the problem is, because often it isn't articulated very well. They have some financial criteria that have to be assessed. And then what is presented to us as the in-house team is a fairly neatly packaged problem. And they tend to be bite-sized pieces. These are not cases that run for years and years. It may be about registering a charity, it may be about a dispute with a landlord, but it is on the community side, community project side, which is where we're most engaged, it tends to be calling on the skill set that in-house lawyers already have. So property advice, maybe data protection advice, some corporate advice, commercial contracting advice. So the lawyers don't have to go out and learn a new skill. It was interesting to hear the debate this morning about M&A lawyers becoming experts in family law, and I think that's potentially a really interesting development, but we're certainly not there at the moment. So what LawWorks provides us, as I say, is with a very neatly packaged project opportunity that can be done in the main from people's desks, that isn't going to stretch out into the future and take a huge amount of time. The projects are circulated on a monthly basis. We get a list, we push that around the department, and then people volunteer if they want to take it on. And they work sometimes together with others in the team on particular projects. The other thing that LawWorks has been great for us is in tapping a need from the non-qualified part of my team. As I said earlier, I've got quite a large portion of the team who are not qualified lawyers. And one of the projects that we've been able to get involved in is called the Mediation Hotline, which is currently being redesigned by LawWorks, but did work where people would call into the hotline if they had a dispute, they needed some support in working out how to take that forward. We were able to use our secretarial and support staff to then dial into a call box once a week and to return the calls of the messages that had been left and to signpost the people then, to allocate those to particular qualified or non-qualified people who had a series of criteria which they could use to then signpost those individuals, call them back, understand more about the problem and suggest different pathways where they might be able to get their issue resolved. And that is a big challenge, finding opportunities for people who work within the legal team who want to be involved in pro bono activity but aren't qualified lawyers. So that, again, LawWorks has provided us with a great support on that.
That's great. And you find that the appetite for pro bono or to do these work is there?
Yes,
It's just a matter of finding the projects.
I think most people would say that you have a core group of people who are very enthusiastic about pro bono, and then others who may get involved in a project that comes up that catches their eye. The other thing that is very helpful in terms of LawWorks is that people, if they are working with a local group or a parent support group at their schools, can suggest that group contact LawWorks if they need some legal advice. So that we then route it through the clearing system. So people are able to work on things that are really very important to them personally and not just things that come through the system. But yes, getting more people involved is always a challenge.
Tana, maybe just to interrupt you on that point, in terms of interest within the in-house team, what I've found outside of the US, in continental Europe, is that a lot of our team members think that they can't do pro bono, that they're not allowed to. And so just raising the awareness within Caterpillar to say there are ways that you can contribute in a legal way back to the communities, so not doing community service, but actual legal pro bono work, as long as you're within the constraints of our pro bono program. And just raising that awareness within our team to say, yes, you're not actually prohibited, completely from doing that type of work. It's been a bit of a challenge, and it's continuing. I mean, being able to reach out and convince people that they're not doing anything illegal
by doing the pro bono work. Great. And Tom, I know at Clifford Chance you do a lot of clinics for the in-house counsel for trainings and things. If you can speak about that.
Yes. Broadly speaking, I think we take a similar approach to the one Charles was talking about in that in trying to procure pro bono work, a couple of things we have in mind: making it very easy for lawyers to take up the opportunity. So we want to my role is to take the hassle out of the process for the lawyer. And we also want the lawyers doing the work to be able to be confident that the piece of work is going to make a difference, is going to have impact. And to achieve that, we go through our vetting process with our pro bono clients. But to me, even more important, the bulk of the work we do does sit within some strategic objectives that the firm has, so that our lawyers can know that, if they take part in one of our programs, it will have an impact on improving access to justice in parts of London, for example. And we don't alter that approach to try and make what we can offer attractive to in-house counsel, because we think if it's attractive to our lawyers, for the same reasons, it's going to be attractive to in-house counsel. We do a lot of work in London in advice clinics, as Tanin has said. We go out to 7 clinics a week. We have about 200 of our own partners, associates, and trainees involved in that program each year. And it's a reasonably big commitment. We expect people to go down to the advice centre once a month, see 2 clients, and usually do several hours of follow-up work. We've built around that systems to look after, to keep an eye on the quality of what we do, because after all, this is social welfare law advice. We're not social welfare lawyers. We have systems in place for supervision, for developing know-how in these areas of law, for training our lawyers in these areas of law. And the process of involving in-house counsel in that work has actually been pretty straightforward. We've been doing this work for 15 years. Those structures that I talk about have been in place for a long time. And the offer we can make to in-house counsel is essentially you can piggyback on the back of those structures. And over the last, since I've been in the firm, over the last 7 years, we've had 4 major clients in London participate in that scheme. I think in 4 of the advice clinics in the last year, 20 in-house counsel were involved in going down to Bethnal Green or Canning Town or Stratford or wherever it is once a month to give advice. It's not for everybody, that sort of work, but if there are in-house lawyers who want to do that, certainly I think there's a model that makes it very straightforward. Just briefly, the other sort of category of our work is very different, is advising NGOs, usually much closer to our expertise, in the way that all of you will be familiar with. Increasingly, our approach, like Charles's, is to do this within the context of continuing ongoing relationships. We have largely moved away from the sort of ad hoc request coming from through sort of personal networks, the cliche being the partner's wife who sits on the board of the donkey sanctuary and the donkey sanctuary's lease is expiring and the call comes through. I mean, I don't think we work like that at all now. We see at the other end of the spectrum how we do work. We have key strategic relationships with NGOs, both globally. We have an objective to have 20 of these relationships up and running within the next 3 years. At the moment, we've got 14. And essentially, our offer to those NGOs is we will do our best to meet your need for legal advice around the world. And we think that one of the huge benefits of that approach in a very virtuous circle is we get to know the NGO better and better. We understand properly what they're about, what their objectives are, and we can reflect and figure out ways that we can, we hope, make significant input into them achieving those objectives. And when that works, the results for everybody involved are, extremely, for the NGO, obviously fantastic, and for the lawyers, very, very rewarding. And again, straightforwardly, we can take those sorts of opportunities to in-house counsel, and I think they're often very, very appealing.
It sounds like a win-win-win across the board,
Yeah.
which is nice. Before we continue, is there anyone in the audience that wanted to share their personal experience, either as in-house counsel or law firms working with that in-house counsel, how you source your pro bono projects? I know there are a few of you there. Sure.
I wanted to follow up on the NGOs. How do you find NGOs and figure out which ones you want to partner with? What are the criteria that you use?
The second part of that is slightly easier to answer than the first part, so I'll start with the easier part, the criteria. We have 3 themes that we want all our pro bono work to sit within. So we want everything we do to have the effect of widening access to either justice, finance, or education. So that's the sort of top line criterion. We think the way to make these relationships work is, or one of the ways, is to have proper leadership within the firm, and that means a partner in the firm or a number of partners who want to manage the relationship in the same way that they manage fee-paying relationships, so that they can bring all the resources to bear that the NGO requires, we hope. So the next thing is we need to find a partner within the firm who's usually, for personal reasons of personal interest or conviction, wants to put the time into managing the relationship. We want to get the sense that the NGO kind of understands the offering and the type of relationship that we want to have with them. And we are, we're particularly interested, I suppose, in helping them achieve, keep coming back to this point, that, deliver on their strategy. So sort of input into that part of their work. We want them to be sort of interested in us providing that. We want the opportunity for senior lawyers in our firm and for partners to be able to deliver, the expertise they've honed over, 10, 20 years on behalf of the NGOs. So we're sort of interested in NGOs who seem receptive to that approach. And interestingly, the way that's the 14 global relationships we have at the moment, the way that's worked out is, on the whole, these are actually quite small NGOs, many of whom we've sort of got to know as they were on the sort of cusp of significantly scaling up what they do. And it's, I don't think it's coincidence. Those organizations seemed very receptive to the way that we wanted to work.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Alex in the red, to your left, right.
Is that working? Yes. Alexandra Turton from GE. Just wanted to pick up on the issues around how you find projects. I mean, very similar experiences to the ones that the other in-house counsel has spoken about when we met yesterday. One of the things that strikes me is that for the law firms, it's very much coordinated from London. And I think one of the issues that we have is that our lawyers are spread all across the region. So yes, we have critical mass in London at GE, but we have huge numbers of lawyers across Europe. So I think in terms of actually identifying projects, there is an open door for law firms to really start looking more at a country level. So to, rather than, because I have a lot of dialogue with my counterparts in London and try in various law firms and try to encourage them to get their local pro bono sort of partners to talk to our guys, say in Italy or in Hungary or whatever. But I would really encourage the law firms to do that, because there is a huge untapped market there. We can't just, for us as an international company, we can't just continually be coordinating this through London. We are missing out on hundreds of lawyers across continental Europe, really, who are not engaged. So that was just, I throw that down to the law firms to say, we're here, we have lawyers. I'm sitting next to one of my Italian colleagues. We've got lawyers who are ready and willing to get engaged in projects, but it's identifying the projects is very, very difficult. I mean, we do use trust law and PillNet, and we've had some really successful projects with those, and also with law firms, but it's always very much been driven from London. And I think it would be great if we could make that more local.
I wholeheartedly support that, which is why Charles was such a gem to find.
Yes, and we have people in Brussels, so...
Exactly.
Yeah, so my firm, surprisingly, so recently had to hire a new UK CSR / pro bono, whatever. And in her job description, European coordination was left out, meaning that I could step in and do the things for all Europe, so which is very good. But it's true that many things are coming out of London, but frankly, I'm sure that it shouldn't be that complicated to get to local offices and either find someone ready to help you getting a wider project, or even make sure that everyone is speaking to his local counterparts. Because one of the things we are doing currently, for example, is trying to partner with one NGO and then make sure that, so it's a big one this time, but with representation in every country where we have offices. And what I'm trying to make sure is that each and every local people is meeting with the local office of bureau to make sure that they get connected. So I can try to find European-wide project, but it's also their responsibility to speak together and make sure that locally they find project. Because I think there is, as it was said this morning, there is a great variety of things that can be done. So EU-wide or international project is probably very fancy and very good to put somewhere on your website, but day-to-day little things are also very important. So let's try to make sure that every project can be staffed properly. So.
One thing I would say in response to that is you should ask us, and if you ask us, we'll we're in a similar position. We can make with the structures we've got, we could get things developing.
Tom,
I think, and the way you can help us do this is push it up your agenda at sort of senior level in your relationship with us, and then a call comes through to me, and I'm told to deliver it.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge with that, as we discussed earlier, is that in some European countries there isn't the culture of pro bono, there isn't the understanding of pro bono, and I think the role that you can play, which I think was the request, is you go and suggest it. Don't wait for the in-house lawyers to come and ask, because actually, I've spoken to European colleagues, and in some countries they say, oh yeah, we do pro bono work. I did my ex-person's conveyancing. Well, that's not pro bono work. Yeah. So there is a misunderstanding, A, of the obligation, I suppose, to do some pro bono work, but B, of the ability to do it, and the point earlier that there is a misunderstanding in some markets that they can't do pro bono work. So I think encouragement from the law firms, you going out and saying to them, please get involved, let us come and talk to you about it. I think that's probably what the request was.
And we have a very broad definition of pro bono activity for the very reason that we try to get around so many restrictions in European countries. So we deliberately made the definition broad so that people can get involved. I think that's absolutely right. Very proactive from the law firms that you're in the way of working with corporates. I think that would really, really help, particularly in the European countries. I think it's not the case in the UK.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll take one more question before we move on. Thank you.
Hi, Marlon Winbom from HP. I totally agree with GE, but I think I work a lot in continental Europe, outside the UK, and I think the problem is that it's not just the in-house lawyers that are having a problem finding proper pro bono, it's also the law firms. I've spoken to most of the larger law firms that have offices all over Europe, and I think they have the same struggle, actually. So it's usually very UK-based for the law firms as well. And they can't find local projects either. So I think that's the main issue. We've done what a lot of people on the panel have said. We are working with global NGOs to solve that, and that's how we're able to do pro bono. But it would be really good if the law firms were able to, have local projects in other countries than the UK.
Why do you say local projects are better to?
Not necessarily local projects, but just have pro bono at all in the countries. It doesn't necessarily need to be local, no.
Thank you. I think we'll move, that's a good transition into our next question, which is what are the challenges and barriers that the in-house counsel are facing when doing pro bono, whether it's regulatory, insurance issues, or finding the time to actually be able to do the pro bono work. I'll ask Claire if you want to speak on that.
So two main topics that I think any in-house team would need to look at before they start thinking about whether they've got time to do it. One is that you have to have insurance, and that's where either a clearinghouse like Lawworks or working with a law firm can solve that problem. I know some corporates do have PI insurance that covers their in-house teams to do pro bono work, but a lot don't. Siemens, our insurance wouldn't cover us to do that kind of work. So that's one of the first challenges, is to check the insurance position. Lawworks does itself provide the insurance, so that's another attraction for working with them. But clearly, when we work with the law firms, the product is badged with the law firm name on it, so that, again, that deals with the insurance issue. The second challenge in the UK is that in-house lawyers cannot work on litigation on disputes, and that is being interpreted relatively broadly. So I have a number of my lawyers who are very experienced in disputes before they become formal litigation, but it's difficult for them to become involved and assist on those pro bono projects because of the SRA guidelines. So those are the two main challenges. The workload, I think that's a challenge for everybody. We're all being asked to do more with less all of the time, and even getting Siemens work done can sometimes be difficult. I think if people want to be involved in pro bono work, they find a way of managing that for themselves. What we do as a kind of corporate is to say that we recognise the work that we do. We don't measure it in terms of absolute hours, but it is part of people's targets that they are involved in some community activity, pro bono work. We're trying to make different opportunities available for them. We make available secretarial support. We make clear that people can do the work in their own office hours. So we do as much as we can to support and encourage, and also to say that, if you take on a project and it becomes too much, we'll find another way of providing support on that.
To make the resources more available to them.
Yeah.
Because I know in corporations it's a bit of an issue that you don't have the resources in order to do the pro bono work or to find it. And I think that's one point that you spoke about yesterday, Shinobu, that in law firms, they have teams that work on pro bono and are sourcing it, whereas corporations don't have that.
Right.
Correct.
It's typically a side job for us. So we don't have a dedicated person to focus on pro bono.
No.
I mean, at Caterpillar, we on the insurance issue, we are self-insured for projects that are approved through the pro bono committee. But then, in addition to that, we also leverage off of the law firms with whom we work, just to make sure that we're doubly covered on the insurance front. And then, with respect to the kind of the unauthorized practice of law, to make it easy and to kind of allay the fears of our staff, what we've done for our program outside of the US is to say that we're not going to take any litigation cases anywhere in Europe. So we mainly, from a legal pro bono perspective, we mainly focus on kind of the research and drafting of memos and doing some clinics where those are, excuse me, where those are possible. But we do try to avoid those areas that would be viewed a little bit with a bit of a touchy eye.
Great, thank you. And yesterday and just now we had heard that some of the corporations are broadly defining pro bono so that their legal teams are able to get creative with their projects and what they do to get a taste of it before they take on bigger projects. Is that something that's at Siemens, whereas it's a broad generalization, or is it more specifically defined as to what pro bono is?
Well, I mean, we talk generally about people being involved in community activities, and Siemens has a big a CSR element, and we try and follow that in the legal team. We are allowed to take a certain number of volunteering days every year, and I've made clear to people in the department that they can use that in bite-sized chunks of an hour or 2 hours if that works best for them. But in terms of pro bono work, I mean, my definition of pro bono work is providing legal advice and support. So I wasn't involved in the conversation yesterday. I may be interested to hear a little bit more about that. But for us, pro bono generally is focusing on more legal topics.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was an interesting conversation that we had yesterday. At Caterpillar, we also have a very narrow definition for pro bono, and we track pro bono hours, even though it is completely voluntary. And we separately track our community service or non-legal volunteering hours as well. But I'm going to have to ponder that a little bit to see whether if we broaden that definition for at least Caterpillar's EAME pro bono program, whether that will be able to at least start to raise the profile and get people interested who otherwise might just be kind of turned off by the fear of regulatory hurdles. So I'm going to be taking that back to our committee.
So can I ask, sorry, not having been involved in the conversation, what was the broader definition, what sort of things were being included? Is there something
Like mentoring students,
Okay.
and that was something that kind of stuck in my mind because I found that to be quite interesting. I don't remember.
I'm
attending
trying
to.
to do. It was Alex.
I think it was very much about, sorry. And we certainly do have legal advice at the forefront of pro bono. There's no question on that, and we will do multi-jurisdictional legal advice projects and all sorts of things like that. But it's also mentoring students. It's also mentoring disadvantaged. We work with Dress for Success, with disadvantaged women who are trying to get back into the workplace. We've sent lawyers off to Tanzania to basically help teach at the law school out there, to help, you know, with the rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. So we've done that over the last 5 years. Now that strictly, you know, depending on how you're defining pro bono, may not be court. And those are the sorts of things that enable us internally to sort of flagship some of the things that actually, you know, I find that corporate lawyers, for example, are really interested in trying to help these disadvantaged women, and relationships are developed where, you know, they continue to mentor them. And also we run a program with Alan Novery where they have a week's program for disadvantaged children. It's a sort of an aspirational program, and we provide the winning team with access to GE, which is about what it's about to be a lawyer. I mean, these are people who've never been to university, from families where nobody's been to university, free school lunches. I mean, they have no access to what it means to be a lawyer. So we've included things like that in our concept of pro bono, which I think has really helped to engage, particularly in places like Germany, and to a certain extent in France, where you know, you've got some challenges and certainly some big cultural issues. But the more we can encourage people to get involved, I think the more that they'll be ready then to take on something perhaps a little bit more adventurous, work on projects with law firms, etc. So I think in order to get our programme up and running, we needed to broaden the definition in Europe. In the US, it's very much focused on the provision of legal services.
Okay, thank you. Interesting.
Is that something that could work at Siemens, or are you more
Well, I
focused?
mean, there are other projects that are similar. So we do a lot of work, I mean, as an engineering company, trying to get girls involved in the STEM subjects, sponsoring engineering students. So there are other projects, but they don't fall within the definition of pro bono. So, yeah, interesting to think about whether there are maybe overlapping areas. Things like the student mentoring, I think, could be quite interesting.
Thank you. And moving on, what solutions have you found work best getting around? You spoke about working with each other in partnerships with law firms. If you can speak a little bit about how that even came about in the beginning, how you got to know each other and where you were at today. Sorry, Charles and Genova.
I've been talking too much.
So what we can first say is that it all started at Pilnet,
Yes,
which is good. So because I was on one of the panel on immigration in Madrid, and at the end of the presentation, I had two ladies coming in. Shinobu was one of them, saying we are cat lawyers and we need to set up the European pro bono program. Why are you not helping us? And so Catway is, of course, a very important client of the firm. So there were already discussions in the US trying to identify projects for Caterpillar as well. And so that was kind of the start. So basically how we did is we first discussed a lot to try to just see and try to identify the kind of project that were relevant. And so we faced, in fact, a lot of different situations. So it was clear from the beginning, and probably because of Shinobu's background, that clinics was one of the things that they were interested in. On that side, so in continental Europe, we are very bad doing clinics because it's not something that is very widespread. So I took that one and said, okay, we're going to reflect on that and try to see how we can manage to organize something. What was also clear is that so they were interested by a mix of desktop research, so to speak, and that kind of work can be outside of the comfort zone of people, but that they were also a big interest of trying to use legal skills that people have to do projects. So that was a kind of challenge. So 3 missions, trying to find 3 projects. And we succeed. So, so we managed to find those projects. And maybe, Shinobu, you speak first about the forced,
the forced marriage. So one of the things that we really wanted to do, as I had said before, was find a project where that could be also kind of a team building effort for Caterpillar staff. So getting volunteers from all the different offices involved. And we were able to work with Mayor Brown to identify Tahirih Justice Center, which is an NGO based out of Washington, D.C. that provides holistic services, including legal services, to women and girls fleeing violence in the U.S. And the project that we identified was a very extensive research project looking into the laws for marriage and forced marriage and child marriage and divorce in 24 different countries. We were able to get about over 30 volunteers from the Mayor Brown side and likewise more than 30 volunteers from Caterpillar, from our offices from Beijing, Singapore, Sao Paulo, Mexico, Brussels, everywhere in the world to work on it. And it provided a really interesting opportunity to do desk work. So within the confines of your own office, whenever you have time, on a subject with which probably nobody had any experience. Forced marriage is apparently one of the newer areas of law in the U.S. at least, and with a global reach. And an opportunity to also collaborate with colleagues and within Caterpillar and with Mayor Brown on a global basis that would have a real impact on women and girls. In the U.S. It was the main focus, but then that has been expanded because the research that we did and the very detailed memos that we put together will be made available to anybody who would want to have access to that to find out the recourse for these women that would be fleeing forced marriage situations. And it was, I would want to say, we went through a very careful consideration of the project because we wanted to make sure that that as a global company, we're not imposing kind of cultural values, Midwestern U.S. cultural values on the rest of the world. So we wanted to make sure that it is forced marriage and not arranged marriage. And that was clear that there was a distinction between forced and arranged marriage. And really we were talking about coercive practices here. So that was the major global project.
The big global one. And so just to give an idea of numbers, Shinobu said, so we had more than 30 people from our firm engaging, and so that project totals around 3,300 hours on our side, so it's kind of a reasonably sizable one, so to speak. And so to go from the big one to a very small one, so which is the immigration clinic where we managed to develop. I think it's also very important, so those global projects are key, but it's very important to be also active in the community and trying to do very local things. So with my homework of trying to identify or find a way to do an immigration clinic, I was fortunate by my background because as a young lawyer in Belgium, you have to do legal aid cases, and I did a few in immigration law. So what I was able to manage is to first identify local NGOs that will help us to have the to find the beneficiaries, because as it was mentioned, so I'm unable to go and find all people that will require immigration law advice. And that was just, also thanks to Pillnet, because in one of the conferences I spoke to someone from the European Refugee Council. He directed me to the local partner they had in Belgium, and so we engaged with them, and we find a way to partner with that local NGO and to also engage CADIN. And so what we did is we first trained CAT lawyers on immigration law and asylum procedure in Belgium during a morning session. And after having had to hear me during 2 hours, they had the opportunity to put that in practice. And so we combined community work with legal advice by going to a place where asylum seekers can get food. So maybe just to give a step back. So in Belgium, the procedures for asylum seekers is kind of hard. And so they have to be in the city center at 8 in the morning. They have to pass a series of tests during the morning, and then they are left out with nothing during an hour. And they need to go back to the authorities for interviews in the afternoon. And so during that hours where they are just left there and for nothing, local NGOs have developed a way to feed those people. So they are all those that are in need, so can go to a place, receive food, be provided with food, soup, etc., etc. And so we went there, served food to those asylum seekers, and in addition to that, we're able to guide them through the procedures. It was kind of basic, but just explained why that interview they will have in the afternoon is important, the type of things they need to be cautious about, and so just giving those first line advice to asylum seekers. And I think it was for everyone a very rewarding experience. So you have learned a bit of asylum law, so that's probably not something you will use any longer, but at least you get involved to local community projects.
Thank you for sharing those with us. And Tom, do you have any experiences outside of the clinics working with the in-house counsel on projects?
Yes.
You would like to share those as well?
Well, I will, yeah. I mean, just to go back to I would like to go back to the regulatory problem. Because essentially, our experience at Clifford Chance has been that we've been able to overcome these. No regulatory problem yet has stopped us from collaborating with in-house counsel. And essentially, we've used the approaches that you talked about. This would be a good opportunity to hear from anyone who's actually, where the regulatory problem has actually prevented a collaboration from going ahead, because we could have a discussion about, how you might get around that. So does anyone, either on the panel or in the audience, have that experience?
Over here.
That's exactly the question I want to pose. I'm working for a big American company that has a base in Germany. So you're meeting on one side a very good tradition of pro bono in the US, and on the other side, strong regulatory restriction that also changed the mindsetting of the people there, because the attorneys, the in-house attorneys, just have the idea it's not possible to do pro bono. So what they consider a voluntarism project, like painting the kindergarten, but not projects that could be more interesting or more where the people are more qualified for.
Where are you from?
Actually, I'm based in Germany,
Yep.
but I'm Italian and Austrian. Choose
I
one.
was hoping you were going to say you were German, because I don't have detailed understanding of the legal and regulatory difficulties in Germany. Does anyone want to take us through those?
Yeah, maybe in Malta, so my German colleagues is there, and so maybe Malta, if you want maybe to share the regulatory constraint in Germany and the way it's overcome, or what you have been able to develop, at least to develop pro bono work for law firm, and I don't know to what extent it works for corporates as well. But,
We promised we wouldn't call on people.
yeah, but it's a colleague of mine, so
Okay, well, thank you very much for introducing me. Just in a nutshell, I think until a couple of years ago in Germany, basically doing pro bono for lawyers wasn't really, or working for free wasn't allowed. There were some ways to get around it, but basically people were doing it on a don't ask, don't tell basis, and also the bar associations didn't really want to know anything about it. Laws have changed, have loosened these restrictions significantly. Nevertheless, they haven't gone all the long road. So, for example, what you still can't do in Germany would be to do litigation work for free, and that's, I guess, one of the biggest differences you still have to other jurisdictions such as UK or even the US. And that's something that I guess needs to be worked on, even though still the problem is there that the mindset of the bar associations is completely different, especially since the access to justice or the access to legal aid in Germany is also, to my understanding, much easier to obtain than it is in, for example, the United States. And for that reason, the mindset of the bar associations is generally, look, if there's a need for you, you can still have access, and what they're trying to do, they're predominantly trying to protect those lawyers who basically are sole practitioners and who have the feeling, whether that's right or wrong, but have the feeling that big law firms doing pro bono work actually will take away part of their share in the pie. Personally, I believe that's not really the case, because the work larger law firms do usually is completely different than to the work that those sole practitioners would do. But that's something where I guess the mindset in Germany is still very adverse, and I guess overcoming that would take some time, because it's not simply just changing the law or anything. It's simply to get the mindset of those people worked in a different direction.
Does that answer your question? Great. And
I'm just going to make one comment. I think just from a corporate perspective, because I totally agree with what you said there, and I think that is in fact one of the biggest challenges in Germany. But I don't know about the other corporates here, whether you have the same issue, but typically we don't really have litigators in-house. It's not cost effective for us to do our own litigation, so we would outsource that. So we tend not to have litigation expertise in-house. So I think we wouldn't be, from a corporate perspective, we typically wouldn't be doing the litigation type projects anyway. So I think, again, when we're thinking about projects that we could do in countries like Germany, we're not going to want to go there. Typically, our lawyers just would not want to do that. That's not where their skill sets are. That's not where they can add real value. So I think, again, that's why helping us at a country level to educate the fact that there's pro bono beyond representing people at court is really, really important, because that's really not what our lawyers do best.
Tamás Barabás, Pilnet, Hungary. My question is about mainly the comfort zone of the big firms and corporations. That are you willing to enter areas where the state neglects its responsibility? I give you an example. I've just seen a recent statistics where, like, in 350 Hungarian schools, Roma kids are kept segregated. That means on the ground floor, they study in ruined conditions, and on the first floor, the Hungarian kids in excellent digital schoolroom. So, can you, are the companies and law firms in a position, or are you willing to show a mirror to a government or to the state that you are not fulfilling your obligations, standards that you had to do other way? So my question is that I know that it's politics, I know that it's investments and shareholders and issues, but it seems like there is a comfort zone, and my question is, do you have projects already? Maybe I'm wrong, and then there are projects where companies willing to go against municipalities, against the government, and doing real impact projects where kids, in this case, would benefit it.
Any of you want to tackle that one?
I mean, when we take requests to do a piece of pro bono work through the same client selection processes as we take our fee-paying work. So we take into account questions of both sort of technical conflict and commercial conflict. Clifford Chance has a pretty good record of tackling the type of case that you're talking about, and we don't do a huge number of them. In other words, cases of sort of fundamental principle that where the outcome might offend the government, I think is the sort of case you're talking about. Yes, at Clifford Chance we do that sort of work. Since I've been in the firm, I'm not aware of us having refused to take on a piece of work like that through anxiety about upsetting a government. We don't do a huge amount of it, but we think it's really, really important. And that's my sense of the approach that you'll find in certainly the international firms based in London.
Okay. Another question. Take back there, please.
Teresa from Pro Bono Portugal. I was just picking up on a question you made earlier on, which is in relation to the difficulty in getting specific projects or specific ONGs, interesting cases. And just as an information, PILNet has helped to launch a European Pro Bono Alliance, which unites clearinghouses from all over Europe. So contrary to the belief of certain, to the knowledge of certain people nowadays, there are clearinghouses in all over Europe, I think all over the world. So the difficult to get a specific project may also be connected to not using the local knowledge. And this is something in which both international, multinational corporations like yours and multinational law firms can help a lot, because Clifford Chance, Siemens, they all have representations in Portugal, Italy, and Spain. If you mostly will have to help them understand, because there is the pro bono culture, not the legal pro bono. There is a pro bono culture in doing good things, but not in the legal aspects for the in-house teams. But legal teams of international corporations can help to understand the local reality, that there is an alternative. And there is this clearinghouse, you should contact them, see what they have. So there is this chance. And the idea that it's up to the NGOs or it's up to the clearinghouse to reach them, that's almost impossible. For example, in a country like Portugal, if you reach to the local representation of an international corporation, they wouldn't even hear about it because there's no culture about it. In relation to the law firms, I think that the world is very global nowadays, and I believe that most UK law firms have worked sometime over the years with a Portuguese law firm, a Spanish law firm, an Italian law firm. So they can help them also understanding. When we started our project in Portugal, this is just to give you also an idea how it's changing. We did a survey. We did a survey with NGOs, 5,000 NGOs, and we asked them, what do you need? Do you need legal assistance for you or for whom? And 80%, they said they needed legal assistance for their beneficiaries. So our initial project, which was to get the initial legal support for NGOs, changed drastically. We immediately change, and we do individual cases. We do clearing for individual cases. And this is something that international corporations have to understand, that afterwards we did a survey for law students. And we asked them, what do you want to do as pro bono? And all of them say individual cases. 95% said individual cases. They don't want to do desk work, to sit down in the desk and do these fuzzy projects all over the world. They want the human touch. And you losing, it's my opinion, I've been a partner in a law firm for 20 years. I did the in-house periods for a short time, and now I'm in a clearinghouse. And my opinion is that law firms and corporations are losing talent because of choosing only to apply for the most desktop NGO support. So it's like you should look at the trends, and the trends are that people feel great about themselves when they help another person, not when they help the NGOs only.
Right.
So this is something I would challenge you to see if there's open for that.
Yeah, I would agree and disagree at the same time. I mean, I think that as we've heard, there are some constraints, whether they're real or just perceived, for in-house lawyers representing individual clients. So it really does depend on what you're talking about in terms of representing individuals. I do agree with you, though, and that's why having a clinic was so important to me in Belgium. And hopefully we're going to be able to expand that to some of our other offices where we have lawyers, is that human touch. It is more rewarding if you can meet face-to-face with the person that you're benefiting. But at the same time, some of these larger desk projects, you are making an impact as well. You're not going to see it perhaps straight away, and you're not going to be able to actually, see it visually face to face. But I think that it is important to remember that even though those maybe more boring types of desktop projects where you're sitting at your office doing what you kind of normally do, which is look on the internet and do research and type memos, it is actually making an impact. And I don't want us to forget that.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is that helping the smaller community groups, not necessarily on the bigger international projects, but the kind of work we do helping the small community groups is actually capacity building. So if we can work with a small community group and help them sort out a lease that means they're not thrown out of their building, that means they can't deliver the soup that they provide tomorrow, that's actually helping 100 people a day, not just the one person who's sitting opposite me. But I think what I take away from what you've said, what everyone has said actually, is that we need to provide different opportunities for different people, because not everybody wants the same thing.
Exactly.
And the challenge for us, I think, as people trying to operate pro bono projects within corporations and within law firms, is to provide a variety of opportunities that talk to the people who want to do them. So it's horses for courses, and we just have to provide different offers, different opportunities.
And to also touch on her other point, do the local offices have connections with the clearinghouses, with the local clearinghouses, your local lawyers or teams, or is it all operated on a higher level?
So I just found out recently that you have a Moscow clearinghouse, so I'm going to get our Moscow office. But as I said, sometimes the clearinghouses have projects that have such a short turnaround time, especially in terms of responding whether you want to work on that project or not, and that's just not really workable for us. So if being a little bit more flexible with the deadlines to raise your hand would be helpful for corporations, I think. So I think there's a varying degree. Certainly, some of our offices in the U.S. do have direct, local contact with clearinghouses, but not so much in Europe.
Thank you. Other questions? We'll come over here.
Thank you. My name is Ade Ikpaye from Lagos State, Nigeria. Just to throw some light on what goes on in Lagos in relation to the subject that we are discussing. There are regulatory limits on what in-house counsel can do. Especially, notably, the fact that they cannot take on litigation, even for the company that they work. And thus far, pro bono hasn't been, or is not so popular with in-house counsel. CSR is. And the team that brings up CSR work would sometimes have assignments that will engage the lawyers, but it is not done in the context of pro bono as we recognize it here. And I think what we need to do, create more awareness amongst in-house counsel, make them more attuned to pro bono. But then the problem that will arise, I suppose, is how do they get the contact with the people that they are going to assist? And that is where I think the clearinghouse that we have working now would have to come in, because they, on a day-to-day basis, get in touch with people that need legal advice or legal representation, whatever it is. So they can, of course, decide which in-house counsel or which company legal department can best assist with which type of assignment. Because really, in-house counsel are not in touch with people like that. They may not know where the needs are. Which I want to comment quickly also on the concept of compulsory pro bono hours, which was discussed earlier. There was a time, an attempt in Nigeria to make CSR compulsory. And I think we can learn from that. People didn't like that at all. There was an attempt to even legislate it, which was seriously opposed. And I think it will be the same with pro bono if we were to make it compulsory. Because it would just seem like additional taxation, to seem like service, taxation in kind, and there will be resistance. So the spontaneity, the interest, the dedication may not be there if you do it perfunctorily, as if you are made to do it. But the question I have for in-house counsel on the panel is, how do you decide what you have time for? Is it that you decide ahead that you are going to spare so many hours to do pro bono work, or when the work comes, you try to give it as much attention as you can? And what if your regular assignment doesn't allow you to do as much as you should? What happens? Thank you.
Shall I go first? How I decide what I'm going to take on, I suppose the same way as other people do, that a lot of the time I say, when the list comes around, I'm too busy, I'm too busy, I'm too busy, and then something catches my eye, and I think I have to get involved in that. This is something that I feel strongly about, where I think I have a skill that can make a difference, and so I put my hand up. Quite often what happens after that is that I spend a long time regretting it, because actually it is a struggle to find the time to do it. And most of the pro bono work that I do, the legal advice pro bono work, not the organising in the office and all of those things, but is done in evenings and weekends, because that's the only time there is to do it. And that then can sometimes lead to issues in the family. But that's a choice, and that's a personal choice. And that's why I agree with you that I think making it compulsory would be a challenge, very difficult. Perhaps targets is something that might work, but I think it will always be difficult to find enough time in the hours between 9 and 5, or whatever we're all officially paid for, to actually properly dedicate the time to doing pro bono work. What happens if I can't find the time? My personal experience is that the community groups I've worked for are A, struggling with their time as much as I struggle with mine, so they're not usually chasing me for things, and B, are very tolerant, because they are so grateful for the support that they get, that they fully accept that this is something that I'm most of the time doing in my spare time. So it's like being a mum. You always feel guilty that, if you're a working mum, you're not giving enough time to your job, and you're not giving enough time to your children. Pro bono is the same. You volunteer to do it, and then you spend the time you're doing it feeling guilty that you're probably not dedicating as much time to it as you think you should be. But in my experience, the job gets done, and that's the most important thing for the pro bono client.
Yeah, I agree. And for us, important to be able to identify, or at least get an estimate of how long a project is likely to take. And so then when we send the request out to our potential volunteers, we'll say, this is a very discrete project. We think it'll take 10 hours of your time that you can spend over the next 3 months. And then people can determine, I'm in a heavy work period right now, I can't take even 10 hours over 3 months. Or they can say, yep, I can take that on. And then obviously, sometimes the work ends up being more than the estimate, and usually we're flexible enough. But if somebody is really in a crunch period internally, then they have the obligation to find a replacement within Caterpillar or with a partner law firm to pick up the slack when we don't have the time to do it internally.
We have time for one more before we cut into lunchtime. Take Shireen up here in the front.
Shireen Irani from iPro Bono. Something that we've really appreciated when we work with in-house counsel is their pragmatism. So Claire actually took on a project 4 years ago when she was at Vodafone, and it was just very quick, very efficient, very easy. We were able to engage a law firm very, very quickly on that. And that's something that we see sometimes when we've got that real top-down approach where the general counsel is very interested. But what we've found, and we're trying to challenge our in-house lawyers to do, is to really push the boundaries, going back to what Tamas and another speaker said about challenging. I think frequently projects are created to meet the comfort zone of law firms and in-house counsel, whether they're research projects or transactional, and there's never any follow-up, so one doesn't know whether that research really counted for anything on the ground. It sounds very good, but it doesn't actually translate. So it's a challenge to really use your position as in-house counsel to find out what were the benefits of that research or that corporate piece of work that we did for an NGO, who did it affect, and number two, to really push the law firms outside comfort zones. Microsoft do some incredible work with children, representing them in immigration appeals in the US. And certainly our experience with Microsoft India, we really see them pushing the boundaries, and would love to see other in-house counsel doing that and leveraging their position to engage law firms on the really difficult direct action issues.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that for Caterpillar, metrics are very important. And so, for example, on that forced marriage project that I mentioned, we have challenged our pro bono client to come up with metrics. So they're going to be posting all the research and summaries on a website, and they're going to be tracking who's accessing it, from where, do they get follow-up questions, because they also provide direct services to women and girls, so that we can see where we are making an impact. Because then that's also, to the point from the woman from Portugal, that also is helpful for our volunteers, so that they know that the work that they're doing isn't just being put in a drawer somewhere, that it's actually being put to use. So yeah, I think that is important.
Thank you. And any final comments from the panelists before we close off?
I just had one question for NGOs in the audience. Mm-hmm. Do you have any preference as to whether you get your pro bono assistance from law firms or in-house counsel?
It's quite putting them on the spot.
What I'm really interested in is whether, what is it that in-house counsel can offer you that law firms can't, if anything? Susan, can Susan answer? Because I already said that because she said something very interesting to me this morning about this.
Sure, it was planned.
Kind of. She didn't know I was going to.
Susan Hazeldine from International Senior Lawyers Project. We work exclusively in an international context, and we really value the input of in-house counsel, combined usually with law firms, because actually for regulatory reasons and all the rest, it's useful to do that. But the benefits we see with in-house counsel is they have total pragmatism. They're used to working in very difficult situations at all levels in society. We do a lot of work with governments, and actually in-house counsel are perfectly placed to know how to approach government senior ministers, to make the appropriate links for us. They're also based in many countries which law firms are not going to be based in. And so you have knowledge on the ground of what the context is. And we want to make sure that the projects we're undertaking are appropriate to the local circumstances. So being able to use your local knowledge, and it's not restricted to your lawyer's knowledge, but we love it when you've got lawyers in country as well. And actually, law firms love working with you too. So it helps bring in people who might not otherwise think about pro bono. It's amazingly galvanizing for partners in law firms who perhaps have never considered pro bono, but if it's their best client, they suddenly become very enthusiastic. So I would welcome more opportunities to involve in-house counsel and partnering with law firms as well.
Great, thank you. And on that note, we'll wrap up. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us. Seems like the perfect recipe would be a law firm, a in-house counsel, and the NGO all working together to make the projects happen. Hope you guys take a lot from and have some food for thought for what we took from today and move on to the next session, which is lunch. It's very exciting. And then one small edit, I forgot to mention, Paul Nudik was not on the panel. He was in the program. He'll be at the Spark Talk. So for those of you that came to see him, I'm sorry he wasn't available at the moment. But thank you very much for being with us, and network. Thank you.